orchestra.
We're going to hear Representative Williams' bill first, 7530. And once the hearing for that has concluded, we have 3 witnesses signed up in addition to the sponsor. We will then take Representative Craven, Representative Canario, and Representative Ranglin-Vassal's bills together. The sponsors will come up and introduce their bills, and then witnesses can testify on all 3 as they see fit when they come up. And with that, Representative Williams, if you'd like to start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Judiciary Committee. Second time, so we're counting this year before you. Today, we're both here, or 4 of us are here, for House Bill 7530. It's residents in government custody. It has to do with gerrymandering. This bill has been before you numerous times. I have to say to you, it's an injustice, and we can fix it because of the fact it's completely unfair for individuals to be counted outside of their legal residence. Now, some may say because they're currently incarcerated, their legal residence is where they're being held. But remember, keep in mind that individuals are often, sometimes as many as 1,000 individuals are in the intake, and they are there not serving time, but being held just in the event the authorities made a mistake, which you know they often do. So these individuals are not counted in their rightful legal place of residency if, in fact, the census is in effect being taken. How unfair is that? You know, they're there for a week, and then they're released because they're found innocent, you know, just fit the profile while they were there, and they're all innocent until proven otherwise. So with that, I say to you, the injustice needs to really be looked at, truly be looked at, and stop making this a convenient political opportunity for some, and be fair for those cities and towns for which these individuals reside and are coming from, because that their presence or their absence dictates the resources that they will be getting throughout the year in order to function in that city or town. Keep that also in mind. So if we have, out of that 1,000 individual, 700 who reside in the city of the capital city, but they're all detained temporarily. They're all released for technicality of innocence or something. They all go back to their city, their home, their legal residence. But the city of Cranston will get all the benefits of those individuals that were counted in that particular city. Now, this is the layman version that I presented to you, but I think my Spanglish somewhat gives you an overview of the injustice that we need to fix. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And at this time, I have Alex Key Estrella that is here that will shed more light on the issue for you and answer whatever questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the sponsor before we hear from Alex?
So thank you for the opportunity to testify today on prison gerrymandering. So I'm the legal director of the Prison Policy Initiative. We're a national nonprofit, nonpartisan research and policy organization, and I focus on how prison populations affect redistricting. So, as you know, a person who's incarcerated in Rhode Island at the ACI actually remains a legal resident of their home no matter how long they're there. And a majority of the people at the ACI are serving either misdemeanors or their pretrial, which means that they're still allowed to vote, and they're required to vote absentee from their home address, because for voting purposes, that remains their legal address, just like for any other purposes. But when Rhode Island relies on unadjusted census data to redistrict, what happens is that for redistricting purposes, a person who's counted at the ACI becomes a constituent, is counted as a constituent of the district that has the ACI in it, rather than the person's home district, but they're still voting and are represented by their home community representatives. So there's a mismatch between the redistricting and the representation. And this happens to some extent in all states that haven't fixed this problem on their own, but in Rhode Island, it's particularly severe because the entire state prison population is in one spot. And you get to a point where in District 20, for example, 15% of that district is actually residents from other parts of the state. I mean, there are a handful of people there that happen to be from that district, but it's majority people outside the district. And so while states are required to redistrict every 10 years, they're not required to use the census data. And 4 states have already passed laws similar to the bill in front of you today. New York and Maryland have already implemented theirs after the previous census, and Delaware and California are implementing theirs with the coming census. And the Census Bureau itself has recognized the importance for states to be able to adjust their data in this way. And so for the next census, they're publishing the group quarters counts, which include the counts of people who are incarcerated, ahead of time in the same package as the usual redistricting data that the states get, so that the states can even easier do this adjustment. And I think for brevity's sake, I'll stop there and answer questions.
Thank you, Alex. Any questions from the committee? Representative Corvese.
Does the Federal Census Bureau have any parameters or guidelines that they use with regard to that issue, state to state?
They do the count the same in all the states. So even when states like Maryland, New York went in to adjust their redistricting data, the census still continues to count incarcerated people at the location of the facility where they are on census day.
So then what's the purpose of the state, what would be the purpose of the law then if the federal census is not going to take that into account? Unless I'm misunderstanding you.
No, so what happens is the state takes the federal census and uses it for redistricting. But this law would take the federal census, do the adjustment at the state level, because this law is just about the data that Rhode Island uses for its own redistricting purposes. So it doesn't kind of go back up the chain to the census. It just takes the numbers you receive from the federal government.
And redistributes it.
Yeah, to count everybody at home, and then that
Purpose of redistricting.
Yes.
So it doesn't have any effect on the federal census.
Correct, and it also has no effect on any other data uses. If the state uses census data for funding allocation or anything like that, it wouldn't impact that either, because this just
And how many
just the
states have had similar bills passed?
4.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Representative Knight.
So I just want to make sure I understand it. If we were to pass this law, it seems to me that our the way we allow people to vote, which is if you're incarcerated, you do an absentee ballot from wherever you came from, let's say Pawtucket. That person's allowed to vote in a Pawtucket election, and then we would also count them as a citizen of Pawtucket for redistrict, and we would align the two and have the same policy behind each, right?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Representative Coughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have any quantitative data telling us specifically how much the population of each city is skewed, coming up short, coming up high because the ACI prisoners are all being counted in District 20?
The DOC has some data that is not public, but this, our analysis was on a district-by-district level. So because people in Rhode Island come from all over the state into the ACI, they would be distributed back out. But I don't know which cities would get more or less. And of course, at the next redistricting, all the districts would be reshuffled anyway.
Well, has anybody done any quantitative analysis to determine how much the benefits of each city are changed because the individuals are counted at the ACI versus being counted in their own city?
The benefits don't really flow to the city itself. It has to do with a redistribution in the weight of representation. So the residents of District 20, for example, you only need 85 residents there to have the same representation in the House as 100 residents of any other district.
Okay, so this is strictly for the voter base, is that it? The effort of this bill?
The voter base as well as the representation. So it's on the electoral side as well as the representative side.
Okay, but it's just for counting voters, correct?
Voters and
Called one vote rule?
yes, it's a one person, one vote issue.
Okay, but we're not enacting this bill because benefits are being skewed, dollars are being skewed, et cetera, correct? This is strictly about counting voters.
Yes, it's about representation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Vice Chairwoman Agello.
Perhaps this question is for Representative Williams, the sponsor, or for you, or for someone coming next. We have a letter from the Department of Corrections describing some concerns they have with their ability to comply with the law as it's proposed. The Department of Corrections does not necessarily know whether a particular resident is Latino or Hispanic. They might not also know the age of the individual, whether they're 18 or older. Is that information important to the Secretary of State or the Bureau of Census, or whom is it important to?
Let me just, I'm going to allow Alex to answer more detail of that question, but just let me say this. I had been in communication with the Department of Correction since October, November. This is, and in fact, this bill to you, as you all know, it's not the first time before you. This is the first time ever they have decided to participate. But what is disappointing is while we were meeting on another similar issue, not once did legal from Department of Correction presented any concern to me with regards to this bill. So I think it's very unfair for all of a sudden this letter is sent to this committee. Now they have the right to send you all any type of communication they so choose. However, having me present, what I believe with a working relationship, I think that the concern could have and should have been brought to my attention then, not an email that I received pretty much this afternoon, probably the same time, well, this morning it says that you all received it, the same time, on the same day that the bill is being heard. So, and in fact, one of the requests that I had of them is to provide me with the breakdown of each individual's with the cities and towns, from each city and town that would be incarcerated, so that we could get more or less a number with that respect. Well, today, of course, you know, I'm still waiting for that. So you can go ahead, Alex. Thank you.
So in terms of the technical aspects of that, The bill actually specifies that the DOC only needs to report out the address, race, age, if it's known. So if the DOC knows nothing today, which I doubt they don't know where the people they're holding come from, but even if they didn't know anything today, that would still be fine. This bill would still be workable, because what would happen is you start collecting this data as the bill passes. And then you would build up between that date and the next, and when the data needs to be crunched for redistricting. So you'd have about 3 years starting now. And the median sentence length at the ACI is about 99 days. Oh, sorry, the median amount of time somebody spends there is about 99 days. So you can imagine with that kind of churn, you'd build up a fairly complete database fairly soon. So that's just not a concern that I can see.
Representative Knight.
Except, you haven't seen, I doubt you've seen the system they use to keep track of folks. And I think it might, I haven't seen the letter, but it might be a legitimate concern. They're operating on a, it appears to me, somewhat antiquated system for accounting heads and keeping track of everybody. It has the appearance of a kind of an old school homemade database. And so I'll bet that they would have to, they just don't have the capacity in that system, and they may have to do a separate data tracking thing, and that might be what they're concerned about. Might be an opportunity for conversation with them.
Yes, definitely. They should update their systems if that's the case. But there are still 3 years to come up with a workable solution.
Any further questions for the sponsor or Alex? Okay, thank you very much. Could we hear from John Marion from Common Cause and Stephen Brown from the ACLU?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is John Marion from Common Cause. I will be very brief. I understand we're the undercard today. We are here in support of this legislation. One of the things I just want to emphasize is that we go to great lengths to get legislative districts to be very equal in population. For those of you who lived through the last redistricting, you'll remember that your districts are within, in many cases, one person of each other in terms of equal population. And that's because the U.S. Supreme Court demanded that starting in the 1960s with a series of landmark cases establishing the principle of one person, one vote. This is really just a continuation of that, saying that, as you heard, people who are given voting rights in a certain district should be counted in those districts for purposes of redistricting. I just want to touch on Representative Coughlin's question. There is an analysis that we can provide you that the Prison Policy Initiative did do that shows there are no funding formulas tied to the size of your district. There are many funding formulas tied to census data that affect your cities and towns, but not to the size of the state legislative district. So I'll provide that to you. And so you'll see that this won't affect money flowing to Cranston or any of the other 38 cities and towns affected by this. It will only impact redistricting. The other point I would just like to make is that we're 3 years away from the next redistricting. So now is actually the time to pass this so that DOC can get ready and so that when the next redistricting happens, whomever you hire as your redistricting consultant can do this. It's better to do this now than it is to do this closer to the actual redistricting. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for John? Stephen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Stephen Brown from the ACLU of Rhode Island, also here to express our strong support for this legislation. I'll only make one point that hasn't been raised. You heard some figures about the skewing of state districts at the state level. The disproportionality is even greater at the local level. So, for example, when you look at the Cranston wards and how they're broken up, in one of the wards, 1/4 of the residents are counted from the ACI, which means 1/4 of the residents in this ward cannot vote for the person who allegedly is representing them through the census figures. So we hope you will correct this inequity and treat people the same as where they vote and count them the same for redistricting purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Steve Brown from the ACLU? Thank you. As the Vice Chairwoman said, we do have a letter from the Department of Corrections, Patricia Coyne-Faig, Acting Director, expressing some concerns, but generally supportive. The ACLU has submitted written testimony in support, and Common Cause of Rhode Island has also submitted written testimony. And Alex also, on behalf of the Prison Policy Initiative, also gave us some written testimony. Representative Corvese? Yes, it's behind an email, so you may not see it in your packet. It looks a little different than it usually does. And with that, we will conclude testimony on House Bill 7530 by Representative Williams.